Joining our program now is Dr. James Duke Pesta, and he is a English professor at the University of Wisconsin, and he's also the academic director of Freedom Project Education. And he's here to talk about Common Core, which apparently is the latest educational boondoggle, keeping our young people stupid. Dr. Pesta, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so what is Common Core? I hadn't even heard about it. I'm sure if it's a government idea, it's probably a pretty dumb one. But just what exactly are they forcing our schools to do?
Well, it's an amazing story, and the fact that it's already in 46 states in the union, 46 different states have it, and people are just finding out about it. It's been there for about a year, in some cases 2 years in places like New York. Common Core is basically a set of educational standards. Right now we have math and English that are being implemented. They were written basically behind closed doors by two small Washington lobbyist groups. And those two lobbyist groups were funded to the tune of $150 million initially by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the really shocking thing, Peter, is how they got implemented. Way back in 2009, President Obama created the Race to the Top program, in which he offered billions of dollars of federal taxpayer money to every state in the union. And the only proviso to take that money was you have to adopt Common Core state standards when they were finally written a few years down the road. And so back in 2009, people were desperate for education dollars. The president doled it out. And simply by taking that money, to give you an example, your state, New York, or the state of New York, took $700 million from the federal government, and they were on the hook for these standards sight unseen before they were ever written.
Well, what exactly are the standards? I mean, on the surface, standards would seem to be a good thing, right? Let's have some standards here, so not everybody can graduate, right? We want to make sure that people that graduate can actually, they actually learn something. So what are these standards, and why are they a problem?
Yeah, that's the zero-sum game that the left plays, right? If you oppose Common Core, you're against standards. If you oppose Obamacare, you hate health care. You want people to die in the street. The fact is that there's not a shred of evidence, no statistical evidence whatsoever, that standards-based education has any impact on student achievement. As a matter of fact, if you look at the long history of standard-based education, including No Child Left Behind, a George Bush initiative that was written by Teddy Kennedy, the fact is that when you set arbitrary standards for kids and force kids to attain those standards, in reality, you have to keep walking the standards back. That's what happened with No Child Left Behind. And then you had the ridiculous situation in places like New York and North Carolina and Atlanta, where teachers were actually throwing out their kids' tests and faking them, rewriting them, because their job depended on getting kids to these standards. Now, if you think about it, what standard-based education is outcome-based education, which is sort of a form of socialism, isn't it? It's the idea that no matter where your kids' talents and gifts lie, no matter how much they care or don't care, whether they try or not, whether they have the right attitude, you're going to get kids to the same place in every subject matter. You can't do that in your own family. Yeah. You can't get your own son and daughter to excel in the same way.
Yeah, so basically, obviously, part of the problem is we treat everybody like they're the same, and we apply the same standard to everybody. And so, obviously, some people are not served by that because maybe their talents lie elsewhere, and rather than encouraging those talents, they're stifled. But, what exactly are the standards? And when it comes to, let's say, mathematics or English, what do the standards entail?
Well, the standards themselves are, and we've seen them in places like New York that got Common Core sooner than other states, that they're actually not very rigorous whatsoever. Give you an example. In every highly advanced math country in the world, all those countries that rank better than us on national math testing, places like Sweden and South Korea, Taiwan, and in all of those countries, the kids start algebra as young as 7th grade. In some instances, as young as 6th grade. In pre-Common Core America, American kids wouldn't start algebra till 8th grade. And now under Common Core, algebra is generally pushed into high school, which means our kids will not be able to get advanced math, calculus in high school anymore.
Well, I don't understand that. I thought they were supposed to be raising the standards, not lowering the standards.
Well, one of the great lies of Common Core is that these standards have been tried and tested. there's not a single shred of evidence that that the Common Core standards that we have them in math and English have ever been tried anywhere in the world. They've never been benchmarked. They've never been measured by successful math countries. It's all brand new guinea pig pedagogy that's being tried out on American kids. And it's all, on top of that, it's all incredibly politically tendentious.
So, I mean, which means what?
Well, take English class, for instance, English language arts. Common Core English requires that 50% of the classical literature that kids used to read in English class, literature that tied them into the Judeo-Christian tradition, literature that taught them American values and American patriotism, that's removed up to 50%. And that 50% is replaced by informational text, all of which comes from the government. So these kids in English class in 3rd and 5th and 7th grade are going to be reading Environmental Protection Agency pamphlets and executive orders from President Obama instead of actual literature. Huh.
So we're taking the literature out of literature? They're not going to read the classics that kids have been reading for decades or centuries in some cases, and they're going to replace that with government pamphlets?
Absolutely. And, 50% of the literature goes away to be replaced with things like Environmental Protection Agency pamphlets. And the overwhelming percentage of this so-called informational lit, it is man-made global warming stuff. That's all it is. Again and again and again, rehashed for these kids. But even when they do read some classic literature, for instance, one of the exemplar texts for Common Core English is the Gettysburg Address. That's great. We want our kids to read the Gettysburg Address. But the problem is Common Core pedagogy in English language arts requires that teachers who teach the Gettysburg Address are not allowed to mention who wrote it. They're not allowed to mention the circumstance in which it was written. Kids are provided absolutely no historical background about what the Gettysburg Address is. They just read the speech.
Then what's the purpose of having the address if you don't have the context? If you don't know who gave it, where it was spoken, the circumstances behind it? I mean, what's the point of? I mean, are they supposed to learn that in history, or they cannot? Do they have these crazy standards for history as well?
Well, the history standards are coming, and they're just as bad. They're not out yet. We've seen prototypes of them. But your question, Peter, applies to the standards generally. What's the point of this? It's the same with math. In math, one of the great premises of Common Core math is the right answer is less important than whether you're able to talk about math.
What?
One of the strategies.
Well, in math,
I mean, in Common Core.
Yeah, but math is the answer is the most important part of the mathematical equation. You got to get the answer right. I mean, I remember, going back into some math class where, where you had geometry or, trick, and you could get partial credit, when you show your work and you show how you're going about deriving the answer. And if you can see that you were getting it right, but you screwed up a certain place, like your proof or your theorem, whatever it was, you could still get partial credit. But if you got the answer right, it didn't matter. If you got it right, you got full credit. It was only if you got the answer wrong that you can get some credit for trying, but you still couldn't get a perfect score. I mean, maybe you could get half, but you had to get the answer right. You can't, I mean, what are you talking about?
Well, that's not true anymore. The premise of Common Core math is that the right answer is secondary to how you're able to talk about math. I'll give you an example. One of the pedagogies, the favored pedagogies of Common Core mathematics is the so-called pair and share mathematics program, where kids are put in groups of little groups of 2 and 3, and they're given a math problem. And the purpose of the assignment is to get the kids to come to consensus about what the answer is. So it doesn't matter if they get the right answer. What matters is that they all come to agree on what the answer is. I actually have tests from New York State, from a mom who, a little kid, second grader, had a 6 times 7 equals 42 question, right? 6 times 7 multiplication, the answer is 42. He got the answer 42 correct, and his teacher marked it wrong because the 2 other kids in his peer group, they had a different answer and they agreed. They got it marked right because they came to consensus about the wrong answer. He got it marked wrong because he stood alone.
So, in other words, it kind of sounds like it's democracy then. As long as the majority gets it wrong, then we're going to go with their opinion. And if you're in the minority and you got it right, so I guess the only thing that we're creating, our kids are going to be able to work for government because accuracy doesn't count, I guess, in the government. You could be totally wrong as long as you're politically correct. So I guess all we're going to graduate is future bureaucrats, or, maybe they can be economists that work for the government, or maybe they can work at the Federal Reserve, because they can be wrong about everything and no one seems to care. But if you're talking about like real, you go ahead.
I was going to say, how about the IRS? Wouldn't you like someone like that doing your tax returns?
Well, I guess, only if they were going to agree that I owed less money. But it probably wouldn't work out that way. But look, obviously, the kids that were graduating, you wouldn't want them working, in aerospace or just anything where the calculations are important, where you got to get it right. So we are not going to be turning out kids that anybody's going to want to hire. Because they're not going to. I mean, this whole thing seems so ridiculous. How much money did they spend? You said there was all this money from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to come up with these asinine standards. I mean, how much money did they actually spend to decide that that the answer didn't matter in math? I mean, what did this cost to come up with these standards?
Well, it's interesting. To date, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spent about $250 million on the standards. The federal government
to come up with this
over $5 billion.
I could have done it for a fraction of that. If they could have given me the money, I would have come up with some standards that were, better than those. But I mean, all this money wasted, people think, oh, it's so great that the Gateses are giving away all their money. See, it would have been better if they'd invested that money in something productive rather than wasting it developing these cockamamie standards that are actually going to make our kids dumber. These standards, if we're going to teach to these standards, what's the point of even having kids in school? Because they're being dumbed down instead of being educated. Complete waste of money. I wonder why. I mean, did the Gateses have any? What's their hidden agenda here? What are they trying to achieve? I don't know. We got a quick break. I'll talk a little bit more about this interesting topic with our guest after this break.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
We are talking with Dr. James Duke Pesta, English professor at the University of Wisconsin, academic director of the Freedom Project Education, talking about this Common Core nonsense, which supposedly is about standards in education. And, of course, the reality is it's about eliminating the standards and replacing education with indoctrination to make sure that our kids graduate too dumb to actually get jobs, and so they'll be dependent forever on government handouts. So I guess the government can be assured of getting their votes. Dr. Pesta, where's the backlash? I mean, are any of the parents complaining about having to send their kids off to school and having them not learn anything, instead being just propagandized by the schools about how great government is?
Absolutely. Students across the country in these 46 states that took Common Core are beginning to really rally. Of the 46 states that initially got involved due to the Race to the Top scheme, 21 states now have begun the process of trying to remove their kids and remove their states from Common Core, either fully in part. And again, in New York, I mention it because it's the most recent. New York, which is obviously a very, very blue state, about a week and a half ago, a number of Democrat lawmakers put forth a bill to try to kill Common Core. And this is remarkable. The very liberal New York State Teachers Union have called for a halt to the implementation of Common Core standards. And they want the Democratic superintendent of schools who brought it to New York fired.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is, right, the Common Core comes with government money. So, if you need money, right? If you're a city or state and you need money, even though you think the Common Core is bad for your kids, you might do it anyway because you need the money.
Well, that's right. And also remember how it got implemented. States who took that money years ago took it under the assumption that when Common Core was released, they'd adopt it. So the moms and dads of America find themselves in a situation where they have to fight now through all sorts of extra legal means to remove a curriculum that nobody anywhere at any time has ever voted for. And think about that, too, Peter, with regards to the Gates Foundation and these Washington lobbyist groups. The curriculum that now dominates American schools is unaccountable to anybody who votes. The two lobbyist groups and a billionaire financier, they are utterly unaccountable to the American taxpayers. And that's the curriculum that's dominating American schools right now.
And so far, all we have is math and English. We don't have the standards for any of the sciences or history. I can imagine what the Common Core U.S. and world history classes are going to look like.
Well, we do actually have, they figured out already, at the federal level, they figured out that Common Core is branding so badly as a term that the science standards that have been written, they've changed the title. They are now the next generation science standards, and they're horrible.
And so what is the next generation? Is it the same thing as mathematics where the correct answer doesn't count? It's just how you feel about the calculations?
Sure. It starts from the premise that even science itself isn't true. And think about things like biology. One of the key focuses of next generation science is that things like gender are just completely made up standards, that there's no such thing as gender, there's no such thing as simple biological sex. Those all things go away, too, as well. So you see where this is heading to in terms of science standards.
We're basically adopting political correctness to science now.
Absolutely. Science is about convincing kids that even basic, like math, if numbers aren't true, then you know things like gender aren't. And then the science curriculum is hugely invested in convincing American kids that not only is the planet being destroyed, but that primarily America is the one doing it.
Oh, so that's based. So science basically comes down to we're all screwed thanks to capitalism. That capitalism has wrecked the planet, and the world is about to heat up, and everything is going to melt, and we're all basically doomed. What's the point of that? What's the point of saying, why are we wasting all of our money? I mean, on that. I mean, the whole point of education, right, supposedly is so kids will learn more and therefore be able to earn more because they'll be more productive because they're going to take that knowledge and do something beneficial with it. I mean, well, who's benefiting from this propaganda other than the government?
Well, I would say it's not a waste of money if you're a progressive leftist. If you ask me in one word what Common Core is about, it's about statism. It's about, like you said, it's about making kids dependent on government. And from that perspective, from the leftist perspective who put this curriculum forth, that's the end itself. The purpose is not education, it's to get kids dependent and reliant completely on government.
Yeah, and that is exactly why I've always argued that the government should have no involvement whatsoever with education. That education is very important, and because it's so important, it needs to be done by the private sector. We can't turn it over to the government, which will use it for a different purpose. So we need to get the federal government out of education completely, no more Department of Education, no involvement whatsoever, and it would be better if we could even get the states out of it and the cities out of it. Just get rid of, the public schools and replace them with private schools, which would compete for students the way every business competes for customers with high quality and low cost. I mean, why don't we want free markets doing for education what they've done for technology?
Because free markets lead to critical thinkers. Free market education leads to citizens who are entrepreneurial and skeptical of government. And so we can't have that at the federal level. And, it was the last liberal train wreck of a president, Jimmy Carter, who gave us the Department of Education. This liberal train wreck of a president is now going to completely federalize education if he has his way.
Yeah, that's why we can't let the government's nose, the camel's nose under the tent. We already made that mistake, and now we're paying the price because the government is getting deeper and deeper into this, and it means we're just dumbing down Americans, and American kids are going to fall further and further behind the rest of the world. And we theoretically depend on our young people to pay all the bills we're leaving them. Who's going to service the debt? Who's going to make this? Kids that know nothing, right? I mean, who we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, that's right. And if you think about how Obamacare has already mandated the doctor shortage. And like the European nations, in short order, we're going to have to start importing doctors from foreign countries. It's the same thing with math now. Where are the engineers, the architects, the doctors going to come from?
But pretty soon, they're not going to want to come here because our taxes will be too high, so that we're not even going to be able to import them. But hey, Doctor, thanks for coming on. I wish you could have had some better news for us, but appreciate what you're doing to try to shine a light on this topic. Everybody else, we got a quick break. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is coming up right after this.
These are lobbyists who put this together with a large pool of money, about $150 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the really alarming thing about where Common Core got started, that so bad has the previous legislation on education been. No Child Left Behind has been a screeching disaster. We all know that President Bush let uber-liberal Teddy Kennedy write the education bill, which has been such a disaster. The federal government promised every state in the union tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to help out struggling education budgets. The only proviso being, we'll give you the money now, but in 2 or 3 years, you have to accept Common Core standards sight unseen. This one-size approach, all that's going to do, as it always does in situations like this, is gravitate to the lowest common denominator. It's incrementalism, isn't it? That's the way all fascist states of whatever stripe operate. It's that slow, gradual creep, isn't it? Remember when we were kids and you'd be in grade school or elementary school, you'd have a bad day, you'd fail a quiz or you'd blow off a test, and that by the end of the semester you'd righted the ship and you got the grade you got. Now, every assignment, every grade you get, every warning you get from a teacher or every disciplinary episode, staying after class and clapping erasers or being sent to the principal's office, this becomes part of your permanent file and will be with you for the rest of your life, and it can be accessed by law enforcement, can be accessed by job creators, if you go to apply for a job. Something that your kid did in 6th grade, theoretically, will be at the fingertips of employers moving forward. This kind of huge database system on all of us. Again, this is a bigger problem, and these facilities are built for more than just Common Core. But one of the key aspects of where Common Core and Obamacare overlap is the keeping of the NSA, keeping of these records on every aspect of human behavior. But at what price?